in, please. But now it is time for Future Politics Panel.
The Future Politics Panel.
Well, I'm delighted to say joining us today, the awesome Juicem. This is Reem, Ibrahim and Jonathan Gibson. Very good to see both of you.
Good to
Fantastic
see you.
Nice to be back.
Absolutely.
Lovely to be back. I've missed the studio.
Have you? It missed you.
I was here 3 days ago, but I still missed it. I
good.
missed breakfast with you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Right, lots and lots to get through this morning. We've been talking about this morning. This is Jeremy Hunt talking in the Telegraph about Britain is at risk of talking itself into economic decline because of a growing sense of insidious and corrosive negativity. He says the left and the right are conspiring that we are on the way to having this self-fulfilling prophecy of actually the country being in decline. He says we need to talk up the country. He also goes on, and we talked about that with Ben, saying Nigel Farage says Brexit had failed. Actually, what Nigel said was Brexit has failed, and tried to explain the rest of it and then didn't get a chance. But this is the Chancellor, the man who has presided over the highest tax burden in 70 years. So the question is it our fault or is it the government's fault?
You know, my answer to this is going to be the government's fault. And, you know, we're not talking ourselves into managed decline. We are taxing ourselves into managed decline. Yeah. We've got the highest tax burden since the Second World War. We've also just increased corporation tax to 25%, which is, by the way, double what Ireland's is. So effectively, we are sort of letting Ireland become this magnet. We've seen AstraZeneca already, who pulled that £420 million investment. So it does drive out investment. It drives out business. We've got huge amounts of red tape and regulations from the EU that we've inherited, that we've not yet removed. So we're not talking ourselves into managed decline. We really are doing it to ourselves. The government is doing it to ourselves and then blaming us for talking ourselves into it.
Jonathan?
So I have quite different reasons.
I knew you. Yeah, go on.
Arguing as you might guess, you know. I think that clearly taxation is not the reason we're talking ourselves into managed decline, because with the really high inflation, you know, slashing taxes is quite a dangerous game, as I think we saw with Liz Truss. Rather, I think if we
did we though?
Yeah,
she didn't really get a chance to do anything.
Well, the markets clearly weren't on side with her.
But that doesn't mean it wasn't the right thing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think the markets are fairly pro-growth, so I don't understand how, you know, she implements a whole range of policies and then she's battling with the Bank of England over interest rates.
But the markets were hiding a massive pension problem, which Liz Truss gave them a great opportunity to actually lever the Bank of England into sorting out for them.
No, there was a pension problem, but that was aside from the fact that we were dealing with the problem of interest rates, in which, you know, if we reduce taxation, then there's greater spending. We're pushing up interest rates higher and higher, and it's just this standoff, and there's no way in which you can do it.
This inflation was not caused by people spending, Jonathan.
There was a range of causes.
Inflation was caused by the Bank of England's quantitative easing, by the government's huge amounts of spending. They spent, what is it, £150 million on the energy price guarantee. Huge amounts of money being spent. That is what caused inflation.
I'm not arguing what's caused it. I'm arguing what's going to exacerbate it. I would argue that rather the causes of the managed decline was, you know, COVID, Russia and Brexit has actually played a role as well.
Well, I take your point, but you could also argue the government's response to COVID actually caused this, because in fact what they did is locked us all up, stopped people earning money, gave out tons of money at the same time. Just in terms of, I will move on because we could have economists that won't agree, but just in terms of where we go from here, this National Conservatism conference that was held last week, I think the Conservative Party is deeply nervous about what's going on at the grassroots. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on that? The fact is, they said the Conservative Party have forgotten what it is to be Conservative.
So actually, I had a slightly different take from a politician I certainly do not admire. He's not actually a politician anymore, Matt Hancock, who I really have almost no respect for.
He is a politician.
He's a politician, but he doesn't deserve that. You know, he doesn't deserve to be one.
Right. So you're just deciding who you title as politician.
No, exactly. So he said that my fear is that, you know, if we continue playing this sort of culture wars kind of game, you're going to lose the younger voters. And I think, you know, the more liberally inclined younger voters, you know, as soon as in 5-10 years the Conservative Party could, you know, no longer have a future. So I can understand, you know, in some ways they've been slightly less conservative, slightly more liberal than they may have been historically. But for the future, I don't understand how the Conservative Party will manage, you know, if they continue just playing these games around sort of social issues and, you know, really like trigger issues like, for example, trans or, you know, race,
It's not a trigger issue. It's fundamental to our society.
But firstly, I disagree, because I don't think, you know,
you don't have children.
I also think that a lot of...
I'm a child, though. I'm a child.
You're not.
I think it's saying that young people don't care about those social issues is wrong. I think Matt Matt Hancock definitely diagnosed the problem correctly. The Conservative government have done nothing for young people. They failed on housing, they failed on taxes, and they've effectively failed on our futures. But what he did wrong is sort of that solution. The solution isn't to completely abandon all cultural issues altogether. The solution is to actually implement those policies that will benefit us, namely building more homes. I think that is the biggest problem for young people.
And making them affordable.
I think you're right.
I agree that that's a really important issue, but I think if you just look at the statistics about what young people care about and where their views are, a lot of the time where their views are not necessarily so much into housing and economics as I would rather they were slightly more, but there is a lot of social elements around there, and that is a big part of why they are losing the Conservative.
So, well, let me ask you about this, because I wonder how much of an issue this is for young people in terms of migration. We're expecting these numbers on Thursday. Now, when you look at actually the number of visas that have been issued, we've got something like 268,000 work visas. They've brought in 155,000 family members, 485,000 student visas. On top of that, 135,000 dependents. I keep saying this is a city the size of Birmingham every single year. Are you in favour?
Of what, increasing immigration?
Well, of just having these sort of numbers of people coming in every single year.
I think it's important to denote the different categories. So, for example, refugees, we've had a lot of Ukrainian and
we had
Afghan refugees.
163,000 Ukrainians.
Yeah, and, I'm supportive of that. It's to be honest, less than a lot of countries in Europe had. I'm supportive of that. At the moment, we've really, really underemployed, and, statements have come out from the Treasury saying that we're at, almost full employment. And so, we need these workers to come in, fruit pickers, training fruit pickers. I don't know how much training it really takes. They're saying that we can only get 10% of workers are British. They're not getting the numbers.
That's because we don't pay them enough. We subsidise these workers with welfare.
But then they can't. How can we pay them more?
I think what you're right about is the fact that when we're looking at giving these individuals welfare, that is what draws them into this country in the first place. My problem isn't necessarily the numbers of migrants that are coming over, it's the type of migrants that are. And the problem is with this legal migration, effectively a lot of them are students that are coming in doing effectively Mickey Mouse degrees in order to bring over their entire families, and that's wrong because it's cheating the system.
So that's really interesting. If you are a postgrad and you come here, you can actually stay for 2 years after your course, and we know that some of those are actually not actually completing or even not doing very much of their course. Obviously they stay for 2 years, they go into more menial jobs, and so therefore they are a burden on the system in the UK. Now, what I find really interesting is that now Keir Starmer says migration could increase in the short term under a Labour government. I think this is a massive electoral issue.
It certainly is. I think it is definitely, a very hot issue. It's one that people care about a lot, migration. I think a lot of people are very unhappy about the increasing migration levels in recent years, and so they're going to want to cut migration. Whether or not that's good for a country is, in my opinion, a different issue. But I think economically, we need immigrants now more than ever in many ways.
What about this idea of training our own? Getting people who are not employed, who are on incapacity benefits, back into the workforce.
So how would you go about doing that? It's not an easy system.
Effectively, you've got to stop these people from being such a huge burden on the state. And unfortunately, a lot of these British people that are not working, that are on benefits, and I'm not talking about all of them, of course, but there are 5.2 million people on adult benefits. Some of those are in part-time work. Those individuals are not filling in those jobs. Those are the people. It's the government artificially stopping those people from working. We've either got to get those people into work or have the migrants. We can't have neither because we won't grow otherwise.
Renée. What we come back to, and this was actually the point I was making to you, Jonathan, is those 5.2 million, those who are working and then being subsidised with tax credits, we are actually subsidising companies, big companies, to not pay people enough. So actually the burden for paying enough should be on the company, not on us.
No, I agree. We shouldn't be paying people so little, but there's also the nature of the type of work, that a lot of British people don't want to do. That's
but they don't want to do it because it doesn't pay enough.
It doesn't pay enough. It's not glamorous work. But then, if you, for example, start paying more, maybe we'll be outcompeted by foreign companies.
So you're in favour of paying people less and importing them? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not in favour of paying people less. The problem is when you have a free market, if you can import strawberries for much cheaper from wherever it is you get strawberries from, then we're just going to lose all those jobs because British people aren't going to be able to.
Well, let's just move on. So the migration czar, this is the government's migration czar, has backed plans to crack down on foreign graduate visas because obviously there's been such an outcry outcry over the numbers. This is Professor Brian Bell, the chairman of the Migration Advisory Committee, said it warned the government 5 years ago that this number of student visas is just not tenable.
It really doesn't surprise me that they warned 5 years ago and nothing was done about it. I mean, that is ridiculous. Like I said, I'm more on the Liberal side on migration, but it really is about filling in those vacancies. And actually, we can't grow as an economy without filling in those vacancies. We've either got to get those people off of out-of-work benefits, which would be the ideal situation. We talk about them not being paid enough. They're not being paid enough because there's no incentive to. The state will subsidise them,
Exactly.
so why would they?
So can I just ask you, the role of COVID, I think, is really interesting because I think it made many people, particularly older people, reassess their lives and decide, actually, if the world is as bad as we're being told, I'm not going to work. I think it also empowered people in a different way, actually, to say the state will provide. Does that play a part?
I'd say, you know, I don't know. I'm not on, none of my family are on benefits. They all work.
Oh, sure.
You know, I think it's probably pretty difficult still to get by just by getting benefits. You know, when you've got heating bills which are 3 times what they were, I can't imagine it's, you know, necessarily such an easy lifestyle to get through. At least not one that, you know, I would select, certainly.
Somebody that's incredibly well educated like yourself probably would, but you know, unfortunately, when you are on benefits, and I do have family members that are, when you are on benefits and you are sort of within that system and you're sort of getting into this depression, you feel as though, especially for these men that can't provide for their families, they end up staying on it because they are.
And that's a really good point about self-worth,
it really
isn't it?
Yeah. And we also know that when you've been out of work for more than 6 months, you are almost never likely to go back.
Exactly.
Those are the stats. It's very clear. So as GPs, we really try and encourage people when they're feeling down or they're depressed to get them back into work ASAP, because we know the chances of them not getting back, and then that actually makes their mental health worse long term because of that.
Absolutely.
Because work gives people value, work gives people a purpose, and I think that it's incredibly important that we have that value.
So earlier on in the show we were told that actually, I think it was Ben that said the Conservative Party knows the game's up and they will lose the next election.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's true or not remains to be seen. But I find this really fascinating. I'll be really interested in your thoughts on this. Keir Starmer wants to give the millions of EU nationals the vote. So this is, when you look at the number of EU nationals in this country, he said that actually having them here and contributing to this country and not being allowed to vote sits uneasily with him. There are 3.4 million EU nationals in Britain with settled status, 2.6 million have pre-settled status, and 1.4 million, and this is the question I want to ask you, 16 and 17-year-olds. Should we actually allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote?
Absolutely not. I was a massive Corbynite when I was 16.
Oh.
So,
That doesn't mean you were wrong.
I was definitely wrong, and I'm a massive libertarian now. But look, I mean, the fact is that when I started studying, when I started learning about these ideas, is when I sort of actually understood these things. We know that at 18, legally speaking at least, at 18 you're an adult, you can get married without your parents' permission, you can join the army without permission, you can do so many things, you can leave school.
You can pay tax.
You can pay tax. That's you
lovely.
can pay tax at 16 if you earn more. But that's the date we've decided is an adult. And changing that is just ridiculous.
Jonathan?
I actually disagree. I think that 16 and 17-year-olds should be able to vote.
Why?
For a number of reasons. Firstly, the fact that they can join the army and represent the country. There's a big, significant interest
Isn't
in
there
them
a
in the
difference, though?
country.
Joining the army at 16, you're in a sort of training phase until you're 18, as far as I
but you're
understand.
basically deciding your career, your life, you know.
You do that when you
But
choose
people
your
go
A
into
levels.
apprenticeships.
Yeah, exactly, and I agree, but that's what I'm saying. It's a significant role. You know, the school, for example, closing down the schools during lockdown, that was, you know, something that really affected school students. They had no say in it. There was
It
not part of
affected
the
primary school students.
You still wouldn't have
conversation.
had any say in it.
Yes, but I think
none
if
of us
you're-
had any say in it.
No, but I'm talking about particularly students. They weren't representative on the media in the same way. You know, they don't have the same vote through punishing the incumbent for doing so.
So should we let them drink, smoke, get married, drive cars?
No, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying
They're not grown up enough for that?
no. It's not about being grown up enough. I think
to
you know.
decide the future.
Hang on,
of the
one
country.
at a time.
I don't think there's a political qualification that we can ever use. You know, there's 16 and 17-year-olds that have far more political, you know, interest and knowledge and you know, integrity than people that are 50, 60, 70-year-olds, you know, like most of the country unfortunately can't tell, you know, the left wing from the right wing. The political education in the UK is not high.
There doesn't seem to be a difference between the left wing and the right wing anymore. Maybe
No, I don't think it's, no, I'm not talking about ideologically. I'm not talking about necessarily necessarily within the country, but you know, I don't think there's any qualification that you could give me that would necessarily mean that a 16 or 17-year-old who's in full-time education, studying and learning, is less qualified necessarily than some, you know, random person.
So why can't they
hang on a
drive
minute.
cars?
They're in full-time education, so therefore they're not an adult, are they? If they're in full-time education at 16, 17.
Well, firstly, like at 16, there's a whole range of things that you can start doing. But why does being an 18 on this arbitrary line necessarily dictate?
Well, it was 21, of course.
I mean, he's right that it is arbitrary, but that's a line that we've set. We've got to stick to it. If we keep changing them, then we have to.
It's actually arbitrary because that is the definition of a child. To 18.
Exactly.
It's a legal definition.
It is.
It's the legal definition, but my point is that the 16 and 17-year-olds, I think, have the ability to think for themselves. You know, they have an interest in you know, education. They're studying at a high level. They're doing A-levels. So why shouldn't they be able to, you know, think about the future of their country, think about issues like housing?
Think about it, don't you?
Well, let me just ask you a final question. This is Professor Sir John Curtis, the polling expert. He said that migrants and young people were more likely to be Labour supporters. Is this blatant electioneering by Keir Starmer?
I do actually suspect that reducing the voting age to 16 is a voting thing. It is trying to get those people to... We know that 16, 17-year-olds will generally vote for the left, vote for the Labour. Migrants, on the other hand, I think that's more of an ideological position. I think that they feel as though there is a moral responsibility for those people, and that's why they want to move.
But migrants in other countries can't vote.
They can't, no, and also Brits abroad can't vote. So I think that's the point. It's got to be, you know, one rule. You can't be one.
And
rule
these
for
people could vote if they applied for citizenship. It's as simple as that.
Yep. And Jonathan, your final point: is it blatant electioneering?
I mean, there's probably an element of it, sure. There might also be an element of ideologically, you know, thinking it's right. It has been a Labour campaign for many years, so. But again, that could be down to election and vote winning.
They've got the youth vote. That's why.
Yeah.
Might well be.
We'll leave it there,
And
shall we?
Mr Campbell thinks it's a good idea.
Right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to both of you, Jonathan Gibson and Reem Ibrahim. Thank you very much. And that was today's Future Politics panel.
The Future Politics panel.
Very feisty, and it still continues. I can't keep them quiet.